Welcome to our High D and Dairy webinar. We're going to be focusing on optimizing vitamin D levels for enhanced health and performance in our dairy cattle. My name is Michelle Lutz. I'm part of our North American sales team. I will be your moderator today. I just want to go through some housekeeping items really quickly before we get started. First, please know that this webinar is being recorded. The recording is going to be shared via email with all the registrants by early next week. You can ask questions at any point during this webinar by using the Q&A button. So make sure you're using the Q&A button at the top of the screen, not the chat. We will cover as many questions as we possibly can at the end of the presentation, but if we do run out of time and we don't get to your question, we will follow up with you after the presentation. All of you attendees are anonymous, but if you do ask a question, please note that your name will become visible with your question unless you submit it anonymously. I would like to introduce today's presenter, Paige Gott. Paige is a ruminant technical expert here at dsm-firmenich. She's been with the company since 2016. And she completed her BS and MS degrees in animal sciences, as well as her PhD in comparative and veterinary medicine at The Ohio State University, with a focus in udder health and mastitis. Paige, with that, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Michelle. We'll go ahead and get started, assuming my slides will forward. There we go. So just a quick high-level overview of the topics we're going to cover today. First, we're going to review vitamin D status in cattle and what that looks like and what we're seeing in the field. Next, we'll move on to high D specifically and talk about the benefits that we can potentially achieve through feeding high D. And then, as Michelle mentioned, at the end, we will have a Q&A session. So please enter your questions in that Q&A portion of the webinar. There we go. Okay. So for those of you that maybe need a little bit of a reminder on vitamin D metabolism, I wanted to start there because that's very important to understand the rest of the content, essentially. So as many of you know, we can potentially source vitamin D through 7-dehydrocholesterol via UVB exposure in our skin. That can be converted into cholecalciferol or vitamin D3. And then, of course, we often think of supplementing our diet, whether that's livestock or ourselves, potentially with a vitamin supplement, also typically thought of as vitamin D3 cholecalciferol. When we consume that vitamin D3 or source it through the skin, it needs to go to the liver, where it'll undergo a hydroxylation step and become 25-hydroxy cholecalciferol or 25-OHD3, as you'll see it abbreviated pretty much throughout the slide, which is also referred to as calcidiol, and that is the circulating form in the body. From there, the calcidiol or 25-hydroxy D3 needs to go to the kidneys, where it'll undergo a second hydroxylation step to become the active hormonal form of vitamin D, which is the 1,25-dihydroxycholecalciferol or 1,25-OH2D3, as you'll see it in the slides, also referred to as calcitriol. So that's how we get to that active form, through those two steps. When we talk about vitamin D status, the best way to look and evaluate our vitamin D status is in the serum. So that's the accepted indicator there. This data is looking at vitamin D status in cattle, obviously what we're here to talk about today. Generally, we think of if cattle status is below 5 nanograms per milliliter, they would be deficient and potentially be at risk for rickets or other deficiency signs. When we look at insufficiency, so we're not in the extreme levels down here, but below 30 nanograms is generally accepted now to be an indication of vitamin D insufficiency, where we might have immune function may be impaired. We won't be getting the optimal health and performance from the animals at this level. When we move up to 40 to 80 nanograms per milliliter, that's considered adequate. That'll support normal calcium and phosphorus metabolism and also play a role in immune function. But what we're going to talk about today is really trying to achieve the optimum level, which is accepted to be greater than 100 nanograms per ml in cattle. What is the high-end threshold? We don't know that exactly to really achieve optimal performance and health benefits, but generally the literature shows when we get above 100 nanograms per ml, we have better outcomes in the animals. So that's the target that we're going to be looking at moving forward. I couldn't not share this study. When you have a gem of a photo like this with cows, you just have to share it because we don't always get fun photos to share in presentations like this. So this was a study that was done with pasture-based cows in Denmark. They were not receiving any supplemental vitamin D3, and the study was conducted during the summer. What they were looking at was trying to evaluate the synthesis of vitamin D3 in the skin. So as you can see in the photo, maybe it's a little hard to see, they did try to utilize different apparatuses to cover different parts of the cow's bodies. So here on the left side, we have a cow with an udder cover, and here on the right side, we have a cow that has a horse blanket covering her body. But as you can see, their faces, their heads and legs are exposed. And then this cow on the right, her udder is still exposed. In the study, they had 4 different treatments. So they had your natural nude cow, so to speak. We had the udder cover that we just saw and the horse blanket. And then there was also a treatment group where they were completely covered the best that they could with that horse blanket and the udder cover, both. When we look at the plasma concentration levels, so again, reminding you that 30 nanogram per ml insufficiency threshold, we can see despite these cows being out on pasture in the summer, none of them quite achieve even that 30 nanogram per ml level over the course of the study. Over here we have, the peak estimates, and 40 is the max that they had on the natural cows that were not covered. So in general, this is just suggesting that sunlight alone isn't going to be sufficient to reach those levels to optimize animal health and performance. And they did see that the plasma concentration of the 25-hydroxy was strongly inversely correlated to the body surface area that was covered. So, the more coverage you have, the lower the plasma levels are, which we see here in the data, and it makes sense. Moving to some US data, this was a survey that was done by Corwin Nelson and others. Corwin Nelson's name is going to come up a lot during the webinar, as he's done a lot of the research with 25-hydroxy-D3 in cattle. So you'll see his name a lot and publications attributed to his lab group. But in this survey, they collected samples from 12 different herds in different areas, different stages of lactation, different housing systems, really just getting a broad picture of what vitamin D status looks like in our modern US dairy cows. As you can see here, on average, we have, around 60 nanograms per ml is really where we fall. But we do have some cows that are below this red bar, which would be that 30-gram insufficiency. And we do have a few cows that come out ahead of the 100 nanogram per ml target that we're looking at. But you can see the vast majority fall below that. This is despite most of these cows receiving somewhere between 30,000 to 50,000 IUs of vitamin D3 daily. And the NASM recommendation, in case you don't have that at the top of your head, is 28,000 IU. So most of these cattle were being supplemented above what we even currently recommend for lactating cows. Another visual from the same study here on the left-hand side is breaking it down by geographic location. You can see there is some variation regionally, but for the most part, it's pretty tight within the different parts of the US in these studies. And they also have an Ireland representation to give you an idea of cows that we generally think of being out on pasture. You can see that compares closest with our summer pasture animals. But generally here in the States, cows are housed indoors. So we're relying on vitamin D supplementation to really try to achieve those levels. But again, you can see the majority of the cows are below our 100 nanogram per ml target. Another study that Corwin Nelson was involved in, this time in beef cattle in the US. Again, this is just to give more the geographic and the outside sunlight exposure indication that levels aren't always adequate. Depends on time of year, obviously, and actual geographic location. But again, a lot of the cows are averaging that 60 nanogram per ml level. We do have some that are falling below the 30 nanogram insufficiency level. And we do see a few situations where we do achieve beyond 120 or beyond 100, sorry, nanograms per ml. But for the most part, we're playing in that range in 60 on average, despite different locations, different times of year that was evaluated. But generally, we would expect these beef cows to be out on pasture and in theory have some sunlight exposure to contribute to their vitamin D status. One more thing to look at is stage of lactation, because we do see differences there. Again, part of Corwin's US dairy data, we do see that cows in early lactation tend to have lower levels of serum 25-hydroxy-D3. So there's an opportunity there to improve status early in lactation. And then another study out of Ireland that was a survey looking at serum levels in cows that were in spring calving herds. You can see how that changes. This first graph would be at calving. In the middle, we have at 7 days postpartum, and then at 21 days postpartum on the far right. There was high variation across farms and between cows. Generally in Ireland and even the EU, they're supplementing lower levels than what we typically would here in the diet of the vitamin D3 cholecalciferol. But generally, we are seeing some potential challenges at a critical time when cows really need optimum immune function to support health and performance outcomes in herds. So definitely looks like there's opportunity here in those animals to support them and try to elevate their vitamin D status. Why do we care? Why is that important? Obviously, there's a lot of potential roles that vitamin D plays in the body, which we've talked about and we'll talk about further. But that critical potential role in animal health and immune function is one that we'll go back to a lot. This was an interesting study just looking at vitamin D serum levels in cows. That it wasn't, a study looking at supplementation or anything. This was a survey looking at the levels and how that's associated with different health outcomes. So we can see that there are some significant associations here. I do want to mention that the blood samples were collected at dry off, close up, and 2 to 10 days in milk. And these are averages that are represented here for those 3 time periods. If you look into the data, again, not surprisingly, based on what we just talked about, those cows early in lactation tended to, the levels were showing up lowest in those time points for these animals that were sampled over time. But here we do see a significant difference in the 25-hydroxy serum levels in cows that were lame versus those that were not lame, that had a higher level at 91 nanograms per ml versus 78 in the lame cows. We also see a significant difference in the cows that experienced metritis versus those that did not. Again, the healthy cows were at 91 on average, and then those metritic cows were at 75. And there was also an interesting outcome that cows that experienced hyperketonemia or ketosis did actually, we saw higher levels of this in cows that had higher serum calcium or serum 25-hydroxy levels. So Not necessarily a bad thing, and we'll talk about why and how this may come into play. There's a lot of conversations that Lance Baumgart and his group and others have had the last few years about rethinking some of our general associations and relationships and what do they truly mean. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but just an interesting thing to point out here. So when it comes to high D, why would we want to consider feeding high D? What is high D? High D is a pure form of 25-hydroxyvitamin D3. So again, that circulating metabolite that we're trying to influence the levels of and what we've been talking about. When it comes to cattle, bovines, there are three main areas that we're really going to focus on. So increasing the yield of milk and meat. I'm obviously focusing on dairy today, so I'm not going to talk much on the muscle synthesis side and protein growth and development, but that is a big part across species and obviously very important to our colleagues in the beef industry. Next, we're going to also talk about how 25-hydroxyvitamin D3 can enhance calcium and phosphorus metabolism, which is kind of our classic impact that we think of when it comes to vitamin D. And then we're also going to talk about how vitamin D can play a role in strengthening immunity. Again, like I mentioned, since we're specific to dairy, we're really going to focus on the increase in milk yield and that data set, but we do have some really neat data on the beef side. So if you're interested in that, please reach out and I'll offer some opportunities at the end for some upcoming webinars where you can learn more on the beef side as well. So first, we're going to review what is high D or the 25-hydroxy and go through the metabolism quickly again. So this is what we just saw. We talked about very early on. To build off of that, what is high D and where does it fit? So as I mentioned, high D is a pure source of 25-hydroxy D3. So you can supplement it in the diet. And when you do that, you can bypass that first hydroxylation step in the liver because we're already coming in with the hydroxylated form. So this is the circulating form. We feed it. We can bypass potential bottlenecks for that step in the liver. That metabolite, again, is circulating form, can go to the kidneys and have undergone the second hydroxylation step when needed to convert it into that active hormonal calcitriol form that we talked about earlier. Looking at this in more detail, so what happens once we have the 1,25-dihydroxy D3 or calcitriol? It can go and act on various tissues that have vitamin D receptors. So obviously we think of the kidney and the impacts that kidneys have and the influence that we would have on calcium and phosphorus reabsorption. It can also go to the bones and have an impact on bone turnover, and then also the gut as well to influence calcium and phosphorus absorption. And all of these play together to regulate our mineral metabolism. And this is generally, the traditional classic endocrine pathways that we think of when it comes to vitamin D. Similarly, we know that there is activity in the immune system that can help benefit immune function from vitamin D. And then also the muscle cells can be impacted, resulting in increased growth and differentiation and benefits that we would see in average daily gain and muscle development and growth, etc. So these are the traditional endocrine pathways, what you typically think of when it comes to vitamin D in the hormonal form. There's some interesting research. I would say, we call it novel, but it's really not new. Thinking now that it's 2025 and this first citation that I have down here goes back to 2010. But looking at novel intracrine or paracrine pathways. So rather than the metabolite being produced in one organ or tissue and having to enter circulation and travel through the blood to get to the other tissues or organs that have activity, with an intracrine or paracrine pathway, that conversion can happen locally, so that you can have the conversion from the 25-hydroxy-D3 into the active hormonal form in our immune cells. We know this can happen. And we see this also in the mammary gland. Likely, the immune portion of the mammary gland is what's being impacted here, where the 25-hydroxy itself can act as a substrate and increase vitamin D activity in these tissues. And it's also believed to happen in the muscle tissue as well. Again, in the interest of time and for today, I'm not going to focus on that. We're really going to hone in on the immune system and the mammary gland. But just know that 25-hydroxy-D3 itself can also have direct activity once it goes to the tissues and can be activated locally to the active form. So it's more than just our traditional hormonal pathways, the endocrine pathways that we think of when it comes to vitamin D3. Just a reminder not to, keep hitting on this, but I know there's a lot of confusion with the different terms that are used, and I know I use them interchangeably. So just a reminder, vitamin D3 is cholecalciferol. That's our traditional vitamin D supplement that we think of, vitamin D3. As a reminder, it has to go to the liver to undergo hydroxylation step to become the circulating form, the 25-hydroxy-D3 or calcidiol. And then that still would go to the kidneys and undergo a second hydroxylation step to become the active 1,25-dihydroxy-D3 or calcitriol. So just to keep those terms in mind, because I know I will use them at different times. So I apologize for that. I know it's confusing, so that's why I wanted to reiterate what is what. This graphic, I do want to thank Dr. Corwin Nelson. He gave me permission to use some of his different graphics and images, which is really great and super helpful. It definitely improves the quality of some of the snips that you could pull out of the publications. But these are visuals that he and his lab group has put together over the years, basically showing what we just covered related to the vitamin D metabolism, but it has a bit more detail, mentioning the enzymes that are involved in the liver and the tissues to catalyze those reactions to have the hydroxylation steps to either get to the 25-hydroxy-D3 in the liver or to the active form in these different tissues. Like I mentioned, generally we think of the endocrine pathway, the traditional pathways with the kidneys and the gut and the bones playing a role. But again, we're going to talk more about impacts directly on the immune system and the mammary gland, which is likely through immune benefits that we see in those reactions there related to the immune system. So again, thank you to Corwin for allowing me to use various graphics throughout my presentation. When it comes to the 25-hydroxy-D3, so I mentioned High-D is a great source. It's the original source of 25-hydroxy on the market. There's a lot of studies that I could have picked to show this. I just chose one example, but you'll find it throughout the literature. Generally, we're looking at the serum status to see how feeding the High-D, what outcome that has on serum status. And we see consistently an increase in serum status when feeding calcidiol or the CAL groups, the 25-hydroxy, which are these blue lines, versus the traditional cholecalciferol, whether it's at different doses. The two doses that we're going to talk about a lot are 1 milligram and 3 milligrams. You can see the orange lines follow the cholecalciferol at 1 or 3 milligrams. Next, we have the calcidiol or the 25-hydroxy at 1 milligram. And then here at the top, our highest levels we see are achieved through feeding 3 milligrams of the High-D. And this is relative to calving. We are supplementing pre-fresh period, and we see that response, the levels increase over time, so that we really peak here around the time of calving in this study. And then the levels decrease because they stopped feeding the High-D at the time of calving. But you can see this nice response that we have here. So we're going to move into how high D and 25-hydroxy D3 can play a role in enhancing calcium and phosphorus homeostasis. I won't spend a lot of time on this in the interest of time, but generally we know hypocalcemia, calcium status around the time of calving is a huge concern with really high milk production and the onset of lactation. That's a huge draw on the system to provide that calcium to go into the milk, in addition to all the other functions that calcium has in the body. So we talk about the calcium gap, and that there's a gap that basically cows are producing more and have higher requirements than what they have circulating in their system and available to them. So then we see this gap that can result in different issues. At every calving, with each increasing parity, this gap basically gets more extreme because we're not able to recover our calcium levels during the course of lactation. We do see an increase, but not to the extent that we had at the first calving. So these are the calcium levels on the y-axis and then the days in lactation across the x. So we see the highest level here at calving at our first lactation, and then our second lactation we see lower levels in similar pattern, that the levels go down over time in lactation, and then we would see that continue. It's no surprise that anyone on this call, generally we are concerned about our older mature cows having a higher risk for hypocalcemia, and this is a good explanation as to why. As we just use up those calcium reserves and don't replenish them over time, we have a higher risk to have this outcome. I want to thank Dr. Marie Seastridge and Michelle Milligan. I reached out to them to get the original proceedings from the 1995 Tri-State Dairy Nutrition Conference. This is cited and referenced in a lot of different publications, but I wanted to get back to the original. I think Dr. Beatty's graphic here from 1995 is that, but it's not digitalized in the tri-state proceedings. So thankfully, Michelle was able to scan these and get this to me so I could show this to you. Like I mentioned, you'll find variations of it in lots of different publications and books and whatnot. But, why are we concerned about hypocalcemia? There's a whole cascade of other events that follow because of the importance of calcium to the animal. It impacts rumen motility, uterine motility, that can increase the risk for different uterine issues like retained fetal membranes and metritis, different metabolic issues like displaced abomasum, because we see a decrease in feed intake, have a increased risk of ketosis, and all of these outcomes result in lower milk yield and reduced reproductive performance, which is what we do not want to do. We want to try to avoid this. So, and similarly, there's a lot more recent publications that show similar but different pathways. I just wanted to call this out to show that there's a lot of potential consequences to this calcium gap and the subsequent effects on immune function and inflammation and health, as well as the potential secondary consequences to other metabolic issues that we might see. So different representations of some of the associations that have been reported over the years from Dr. Lance Baumgard's group. Dr. Barry Bradford has this really nice review where he talks about different stressors on the system, and we know that cows are under a tremendous amount of stress when we think of all the things that they're undergoing during the transition period, and the high productivity that we see in today's cows. It's really amazing what they can do despite all of these challenges that they're constantly exposed to. This is another variation of different associations. If you have one disease, basically you're more likely to have another, is what this generally shows. Again, there's been some talk in the last several years with Lance Baumgard's group and rethinking those dogmas and what are some of the associations and are some of these things bad or not. We don't have time to get into that. That could be a whole conversation in itself, but I just wanted to really call out that there are a lot of potential implications and outcomes that have been associated with, milk fever or hypocalcemia or subclinical hypocalcemia and impacts on immune system. And then again, that cascade of other diseases that we might see. So a lot to take in and think about, but a lot of things that we can potentially play a role in influencing through the diet. It's a bit dated, it's 2014, but I couldn't find something as complete as this with estimated costs. But we do know, as this table shows, the various diseases and metabolic issues that we see have very high consequences to us financially. These are estimates. It's really hard to put an exact dollar value on every case because not every case is the same. So there's variability here. But hypocalcemia is reported at over $330 a case back in 2014. Subclinical hypocalcemia at over $125 per case. And then some of those consequences that we mentioned, like retained fetal membranes, metritis, subclinical metritis, all of these things that we're going to be dealing with, potentially mastitis, a lot of potential costs can add up when we have to deal with these health challenges. And with labor challenges, obviously there's more labor that's involved in managing these cows that are sick. So we want to do everything that we can to prevent these issues. And again, we're going to talk about ways that we may be able to influence some of these outcomes through the diet. So getting really into the calcium and phosphorus metabolism, I have a lot of trial data that I'm, again, going to go through fast because I realize I am using a lot of time. I get a little long-winded sometimes, but this study, again, is out of Dr. Corwin Nelson's lab. Michael Poindexter did this study. You'll see his name on several. He's got several publications with various studies. So this is the 2020 paper where they looked at 2x2 factorial. They had whether it's a milligram of vitamin D3 or 3 milligrams of vitamin D3 as cholecalciferol, or we have the 1 milligram of 25 hydroxy D3 from Heidi, or 3 milligrams from Heidi. All of this was supplemented on top of a basal ration that included a 0.5 milligram of vitamin D3. We had 60 cows, again, those 4 treatments, and this is a mid-lactation study. The cows were enrolled at 100 days and 110 days milk or greater, and then a subset were challenged at 21 days into the feeding period with an intramammary streptococcus uberis challenge. And what we're looking at here are just some of the serum mineral outcomes that were found in the study. So our gray bars are our cholecalciferol supplemented animals, and then the orange bars are high D or 25 hydroxy supplemented animals. You can see significant impact of source and dose in both our serum calcium here at the top and then serum phosphorus in the bottom, with our cholecalciferol values being lower in the groups, and then our calcidiol or 25 hydroxy supplemented animals are higher, and we see higher values in those animals that were fed the higher dose in this study. So something that we'll see repeated in a lot of studies, that we have higher levels found of our minerals. Another 2 studies, both again out of Dr. Nelson's lab. We have the study from 2018 where they looked at, this is a 2x2 factorial, where they looked at different levels of vitamin D3 or high D in combination with either a negative DCAD or a positive DCAD diet. And you can see those DCAD values were at either, the positive was 130 milliequivalents per kg, or the negative was a negative 130. And then the different combinations with the 3 milligrams of the vitamins. When we look at this chart, we have our total calcium the y-axis, and then the days relative to calving here. Again, this supplementation started pre-calving. We can see both groups, we see a drop in our calcium levels at the time of calving, but we do see our high D supplemented animals, which would be following the blue lines, we do see them start to recover sooner, but the DCAD program is really what had the bigger impact on preventing postpartum hypocalcemia. We do see again those high D cows starting to recover their levels later, at 2 to 9 days in milk, but we do see that drop. So it doesn't prevent it. It's really the DCAD program that has a bigger impact, and there's various meta-analyses that like Dr. Jose Santos did related to DCAD programs and data, so you could read a lot about that in itself. But what I wanted to also show in another study, again, this is a more recent Poindexter et al. Publication where they looked at different doses, the 1 versus 3 milligrams of either the cholecalciferol or the calcidiol. All of the diets had a prepartum DCAD that was negative in this study. Again, we do see that drop in total calcium levels at the time of calving, but again, we see the increase here. The cholecalciferol, the traditional vitamin D3 is our orange line, and then we do see those higher levels here in the calcidiol or the high D supplemented cows, and you can see that is significant. Again, in that similar time period, the 2 to 11 days, 2 to 9, 10 days after calving is where we see those cows start to recover their calcium status sooner. So it doesn't prevent that dropping in serum calcium. It just, we see a quicker resolution that those cows get back on track faster with the addition of the high D versus just regular D3. Another study, this again is the Poindexter 2023 study. So this is the same graph that we just looked at. What does that do in relation to milk yield? So with the faster restoration of serum calcium, we saw an association with increased milk yield in those cows in that study. So again, the positive outcome with having those cows recover sooner postpartum in their calcium levels. Next, we're going to move into the immunity piece and how high D can play a role in strengthening immunity. Again, another study out of Dr. Nelson's lab at the University of Florida. This one is really interesting, but in the interest of time, I'm going to have to really motor through stuff. But basically, they were looking at different doses, again, of whether it's cholecalciferol 1 or 3 milligrams versus calcidiol or high D at 1 or 3 milligrams. They looked at gene expression from the blood leukocytes, and generally, just roughly looking at these charts, the greener shaded boxes mean an increase in the expression of those different genes. So this on the left is prepartum. We have our high D cows here. So the green are the increases that we see with high D. The genes they looked at were a wide variety of things that we know can be impacted, but cell adhesion and migration, pathogen recognition receptors, cell signaling, cytokines, antimicrobial mechanisms, calcium metabolism, all of those were benefited by feeding the high D as opposed to the cholecalciferol prepartum. Similar when we look at the same outcomes postpartum, we tend to see more increases in the expression of these various genes when we feed the high D or calcidiol in this study. Another study out of Dr. Corwin's lab looking, again, this Martinez and Rodney studies were the same studies, different publications out of them. So the treatments and treatment period will look the same, but again, this is that 2 by 2 factorial where they had either, plus or minus high D with or without a positive or negative DCAD diet prepartum, and then similarly the two plus or minus cholecalciferol with a positive or a negative DCAD diet. So when we look at that, we do see an increase, numerically with the high D supplementation to have an increased phagocytosis in the neutrophils that were harvested from these cows prepartum following that feeding regime. And then also we do see a significant increase in the high D supplemented cows when it comes to the oxidative burst percent. So these both are really important for the efficacy of our white blood cells, our neutrophils, to attack those invading pathogens and have that innate immune response to try to clear the infection. So this data is really showing that we see increased neutrophil activity and efficacy with the supplementation of the high D. In this study, they also, on the true animal outcomes that they observed, they saw a reduction in retained placenta and a reduction in metritis in the animals that were supplemented with high D. And there were fewer cows that had multiple diseases during lactation following supplementation with high D. So a lot of immune outcomes, health benefits that they observed here. Another, back to that Poindexter study from 2020, where they did the intramammary strep uberis challenge with these mid-lactation cows. Here, we saw mitigation of the severity of mastitis at 60 hours and 72 hours post-challenge. There's really, we see that here with our severity scores, the typical mastitis severity scoring scale 0 through 3. With 3 being severe mastitis and 0 being no clinical signs. We can see that the high D supplemented cows are lower in our scores at these time points, but by the end of the study, there's no difference, but just a delayed onset of the signs and severity there. And then we also see a numerical reduction in the rectal temperature in those cows that were supplemented with high D. Another study, another piece of that study from 2020 from Michael Poindexter, just more supportive data to show the immune effects that we have. So they saw increase in the mRNA transcripts for IL-1 beta and INOS, so our inducible nitric oxide synthase and our interleukin-1 beta with our high D supplemented cows, whether it's at 1 milligram or 3 milligrams prepartum, or not prepartum, this was in lactation. Sorry, there's so many studies that jumble my words sometimes. We do see the increase in these measures with our high D supplementation. In this table, there's just more details looking at gene expression in the 25-hydroxy supplemented cows. They also saw significant increase in the defensins, the beta defensins 7 and 10. All of these taken together, including some adhesion proteins like CD11B expression that they looked at. All in all, really support the idea that high D is enhancing the immune response. And, we see this through the mitigation of the severity in the cows. We don't only see it at the cellular level, we see it carry through at the animal level as well. It is good to note, though, that since it was an intramammary challenge, you really overwhelm the systems and the natural, maybe defense mechanisms get overwhelmed of keeping out opportunistic pathogens when you directly infuse a bug up into the gland. So that's important to keep in mind when looking at some of this data, that this is not natural. We don't normally intentionally infuse the cows with bacteria, so we do overwhelm the system there. But just looking at this as an experimental model is very interesting to see those immune outcomes in the situation despite overwhelming the cow. Looking at yield increase, so first I have some colostrum data. Not only do we see an increase in colostrum quantity and quality in this study, again out of Dr. Corwin's group, there's increase in the IgG content in the study, a significant increase in the protein yield, and then that again, increase in the colostrum following feeding these different diets prepartum. Follow up to that, again, the same Martinez data on the left, and then Poindexter 2023 on the right. This is just showing that we see an increase in colostrum net energy when feeding high D or calcidiol as compared to traditional cholecalciferol supplementation. Doesn't matter the dose or if it's in combination with positive or negative DCAD, we do see that benefit when high D is included. There's many studies. It's actually amazing how many dairy studies and beef studies are really out there when it comes to high D and impacts of 25-hydroxy-D3 on the animals, but just a few select ones to look at the yield increase. When it comes to energy-corrected milk, so these are energy-corrected values, significant increases here. Again, just picked 4 different studies that are out there, but there are more that support this. But generally, anywhere from 2 to 4 kilograms per day of energy-corrected milk in early lactation when 25-hydroxy-D3 has been supplemented prepartum. Additional data, there's not as much data looking at, lactating cows, and this is a study where they looked at late lactation supplementation, but here we do see, the serum response when feeding high D. This was a 3 milligram oral dose, a study that was done in Brazil. Interesting work that they did, but they did see the increase, significant increase in milk yield and 4% fat-corrected milk, and they did see a reduction in somatic cell count. So these were cows that were started to be supplemented at 230 days in milk, plus or minus 137 days of milk, so there's a lot of variation there. And then they were supplemented for 84 days, but we do see, the yield benefits when we start the supplementation later in lactation, and then again, those immune benefits carrying through as witnessed by a reduction in somatic cell count in this study. We do have lots of resources as DSM. This is a view of our OVN, our Optimum Vitamin Nutrition Guidelines, which you can source from us. They're available online, but you can always just ask. Looking specifically at our high D recommendation, in the close-up period, we recommend feeding 3 milligrams of 25-hydroxy-D3 through a high D supplementation, and then in lactation, we're looking at 1 milligram per head per day supplementation. We do recommend feeding that in combination with a bit of the traditional cholecalciferol. Some of the studies show the combination, some are just comparisons without that, but we do see a benefit anecdotally in the field. We see benefit in feeding the traditional cholecalciferol at a lower inclusion, and then also the addition of the 25-hydroxy-D3 through high D. Again, we're targeting getting those serum levels to remain above 100 nanograms per ml. And then in summary, vitamin D plays a lot of roles in the animal. This is conserved across species. We see these, the mineral metabolism, and there's data from rats and mice to pigs and chickens to cows to people looking at health and performance benefits when we do utilize vitamin D3, especially in the 25-hydroxy form. A lot of survey data to suggest that sun exposure and or traditional cholecalciferol supplementation alone cannot always achieve that goal of greater than 100 nanograms per ml in the serum in cattle. So what can we do? We can look at supplementing high D, which is again the original pure source of 25-hydroxy-D3. It's made here in the States. It's a US made product, so that's great for us here for a variety of reasons, which we won't go into more details on, but it's made locally, so that's great. It's an efficient way to improve vitamin D status. as I showed you, lots of data to show that it can enhance calcium and phosphorus metabolism. It plays a significant role in immune function and can really benefit the animal by strengthening or boosting immunity and lowering the incidence and severity of various diseases, infectious diseases that we saw. And then through that, we can really support improved performance, whether that's milk yield, animal health, growth, outcomes, all of that. Lots of data to support the benefits of supplementing high D. It's been on the market for 30 years. Started in poultry, also available in swine. In some parts of the world, it's used in aqua and other species as well. High D, again, was the original product to come to market, really set the standard for the 25-hydroxy D3 space, and the outcomes, the benefits that we see, like I mentioned, are conserved across species. Some opportunities on the beef side, if you're interested, we'll have 2 webinars this summer. The first on July 25th with a special guest speaker, Dr. Brad Johnson out of Texas Tech, to talk on alternative approaches to manipulating muscle growth and physiology in the yard. And then my colleague, Dr. Zeno Hubbard, is going to follow up that webinar 2 weeks later and talk about specific benefits related to 25-hydroxy D3 supplementation and the health and muscle benefits that we see in beef cattle. So be on the lookout for more information to join those webinars. Thank you for your time. Sorry I went really fast. I put way too much content in this. If you're interested in what we're talking about or you want to learn more, you can always sign up for the Digest, which is our monthly e-newsletter. Lots of topics are shared, a lot of educational information ranging from vitamins, things related to 25-hydroxy D3, new data that's coming out, eubiotics, mycotoxin risk management, you name it. Lots of great content in the Digest every month. So if you're interested, sign up. You'll also get notifications about other upcoming webinars and benefits that we have. I really want to acknowledge my great ruminant team here in North America. Dr. Zeno Hubbard, like I mentioned, is my counterpart, really focusing on the beef technical support. Paul Hadler is our account manager, supporting accounts in the upper Midwest and various other parts of the country. And then our director, Dr. April Levy, also supports us and is interactive with our customers. And so this is us. We're pretty limited, but we're friendly. I think I'm friendly anyway. So feel free to reach out to any of us. We can get you additional resources, whether that's to sign up for the Digest, to get literature, OVN recommendations. We also have an OVN book, which is really great. That's all about vitamins and ruminants. So really great resources. Opportunities to test serum levels, anything you want to talk about. Now you know who to reach out to. So again, thank you. And I know we don't have a lot of time, but we did start a few minutes late. So Michelle, hopefully we'll come back and be able to cover some questions before we run out of time. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Paige. Just a reminder to everyone that you can ask a question using the Q&A button at the top of the screen. We did get some questions that came in. I think we can get through all of them, but please feel free to submit a question if you do have one at this time. And we will follow up with all of those after the presentation if we don't get to them. So the first question that we got, Paige, says, I'm interested in testing some of the herds I work with to see what their vitamin D status is. What testing options do we have available?
That's a great question. So that is a service that we offer, that we can work with customers that want to pull some blood samples and look at the serum levels to check the status, understand where you're at. Obviously we see variations herd to herd, regionally, management wise. So it's always good to understand where you're at. So please reach out to myself or anyone on the team. We can get you more details about that, since it is a service that we can offer. And we have a couple of different options to look at, and moving forward that might get even easier. So a lot of exciting things in that regard. So please follow up with us on the team to learn more.
Second question, can high D be fed to calves?
Yeah, that's a great question. So high D, I didn't, in the interest of time, which obviously I ran out of anyway, I did not include any of the calf data, but there is some data, not as much as on the lactating cow side or the prepartum, all the stuff that we talked about on the cow side. There's a lot more data there, but there's definitely positive outcomes has been seen in feeding to calves. Obviously, those growth and performance benefits, bigger, healthier calves. We do see the health outcomes carry over. So high D can be supplemented. We have lower guidance for that. We usually look at 17 micrograms per kilogram of body weight, or not 17, 1.7. I keep jumbling my numbers today. But yeah, I think it's a really great opportunity, something we need to build more data on and understand better, the timing of supplementation. Is it something you start from the get-go and carry throughout, or is there certain periods of time that are really critical, like around weaning? Pre-weaning period really seems to make sense in those animals that are going through a lot going into weaning, but something we can talk about. I know Dr. Nelson has more data he needs to get published that he wants to get published, so there'll be more publications eventually with existing data that's already available, but it's an area to continue to look into, and I think it's a real opportunity that is a relatively cheap way to get in there and support those calves. So definitely something to consider and follow up with us on if they're interested.
And then another question, where is high D manufactured?
So another great question. I know I mentioned it earlier, but high D that we use here in the States is made here in the States. So there's a couple different facilities within our system that it comes from, but generally we talk about it coming out of Illinois, and our Woodridge facility in Illinois is where it's at. So again, not to get into any of the geopolitical things, but obviously it's made locally, so there's some benefits there, yeah, a lot that we could talk about related to the quality aspects and the oversight of raw materials and the production and everything that we do to have the really pure, high quality product that we have. But short answer is it's made in the US. So
Excellent. I don't see any more questions that have come through for all the attendees on the call. If you do think of a question after the fact, please feel free to reach out to your account manager. We can certainly get those questions answered for you, but we really appreciate all of you joining us today. And as a reminder, I believe we will send out the recording here within a week or so after the call. So please be on the lookout for that too. But we thank you for attending. Thank you, Paige. Lots of great information. Yeah.
I know I went fast, so if anybody would like the slides, feel free to reach out to me directly and we can work on getting the slides, because there's a lot of content there that I know I was booking trying to get through it. But no, there's so much more beyond even what was shared today. So thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.